In the silent hours before dawn, when even the winds pause and cities forget their noise, a single father named Rian Malik jolted awake to the sharp vibration of his worn-out phone. It was 2 a.m., an hour when only trouble or miracles call. His 6-year-old son Arif slept beside him, wrapped in a thin blanket, unaware that this wrong number, this accidental ring from someone he didn't know, would pull Rian into a story he never imagined being part of. And as he stared at the blinking screen with a name he'd never seen, he felt something in his chest tug, an instinct, a strange feeling that even a wrong call can sometimes lead to the right place. Call to action. Viewers, Agar Aap Monte Hain Kuzin Dagi Main Kabi Kabi Galat Kalbi Sahi Rasta Dika Dedi Hai, To please like, comment, share, or subscribe. Carrion, Stories of Kindness, Par, Jahan Har Kahani Ek Nei Yumid Dedi Hai. The sunlight was just beginning to rise when Rian stepped out of the shabby apartment he and Arif shared, his mind still replaying the trembling voice he had heard, someone asking for help, someone desperate. He was a struggling mechanic in Lahore, a man who had lost far more in his 29 years than he had ever gained. His wife had passed away 3 years ago due to an illness they couldn't afford to treat in time, leaving him with a son who looked at him like he was both father and mother. Every day started early, every night ended late, and every rupee earned was stretched until it tore. Yet something about the voice from that wrong call, soft, broken, almost pleading, made him get dressed and leave home before the sun had fully warmed the ground. He left a neighbor in charge of Arif and followed the location he had been sent, unsure why he even cared. Maybe kindness was a habit he couldn't unlearn, or maybe pain recognizes pain, even over a phone. From the outside, the mansion looked unreal, like a painting brought to life. Vast golden gates, manicured lawns, a driveway lined with roses that seemed to bloom all year. Rian felt wildly out of place as he approached. He hadn't been inside anything this big even when he was dreaming. His hands were stained with grease from yesterday's work, his shirt was 2 years old, and his shoes had soles thinner than hope. He almost turned back, thinking he was just a mistake in someone else's world. But then the door opened. There stood a young woman, tall, elegant, delicate the way glass is delicate when it hides fractures deep inside. Her name was Mahira Ultaf, heiress to the Ultaf industrial empire, a name Rian had only ever seen in newspapers he used to wrap spare parts in. But she didn't look like a headline today. Her face was pale, hair undone, eyes swollen from crying. The bright morning didn't match the storm she was carrying. She stared at him like she wasn't expecting him, like she wasn't expecting anyone to actually show up. She explained that she had been trying to call a friend last night during a panic attack, but in her shaking hands she had pressed the wrong number. She apologized for disturbing him, told him he could leave, insisted she was fine now. But her voice didn't match her words, and Rian, who had lived through grief enough to recognize its shadow, couldn't bring himself to walk away. He stepped inside the mansion, instantly swallowed by silence and marble and too much emptiness for such a large place. Mahira tried to pretend everything was okay. She moved through the rooms as if she was just tired, not broken. But the truth hung in the air like dust in sunlight, she was drowning in a loneliness that wealth could never cure. A few days ago, she had lost her father, her only real family, her anchor. Her extended relatives were circling like vultures for inheritance, the media had swarmed her gate, and the board of her company wanted her to step up immediately even though she could barely stand. Grief had hollowed her out so deeply she didn't recognize herself in the mirror anymore. Rian listened quietly, standing in rooms that smelled of perfume and sorrow. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but his presence was steady, grounding. Mahira watched him with curiosity. He wasn't intimidated by wealth yet wasn't impressed by it either. He simply existed, calm and ordinary, in a world where everything was too shiny and too fragile. The morning stretched into late morning, sunlight filling the mansion like warmth returning to a cold place. At one point, Mahira's hands began to shake again when she mentioned her father, and without thinking, Rian handed her a glass of water. It was such a small thing, but when she touched the glass, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks, safety. Not because of who he was, but because he had shown up. A stranger. A single father with nothing to gain. He chose kindness when he didn't have to, and that alone softened something inside her. Hours passed, and Mahira found herself opening up in ways she hadn't done with anyone since her father's funeral. She spoke about growing up in a world where her choices were made for her, where she was expected to be flawless yet never allowed to be fragile. She confessed she was scared of failing her father's legacy, scared of being alone, scared of breaking down in public and being torn apart by the media. Rian listened as if every word mattered. In return, he told her, quietly, about his own storms. Losing his wife. Raising a child alone. Nights when he wondered if love was something only the lucky were allowed to keep. He didn't sugarcoat his struggle, he didn't know how to. Mahira found comfort in his honesty. It felt real in a world where everything around her was polished and artificial. Around noon, they stepped out into the garden where sunlight filtered through tall trees, painting golden patterns on the grass. Mahira walked slower, breathing easier. Rian admired the sky, the flowers, the simplicity of a moment with no expectations. For once, Mahira wasn't the heiress, she was just a human being trying to heal. And Rian wasn't the mechanic, he was just a man who cared. When he mentioned he needed to pick up Arif from the neighbor soon, Mahira looked startled, almost disappointed. She hadn't realized how much she had leaned on him in the last few hours, how his presence had pushed back the shadows that had followed her. It wasn't romantic, it was something deeper, a soul recognizing another soul that had fought its way through darkness. She asked him to stay a little longer, offering lunch. Rian hesitated, feeling his self-consciousness spike. This house, this lifestyle, this world wasn't his. But she noticed his discomfort and smiled softly in a way that made him feel like he belonged even if just for a moment. They ate in the sunlit garden, simple food prepared quickly, nothing extravagant. And for the first time since her father's death, Mahira ate a full meal. For the first time, she laughed. After lunch, she insisted on meeting Arif. When they arrived at Rian's building, Mahira saw the chipped paint, the narrow stairs, the worn-out door. She didn't flinch. Instead, she bent down to greet Arif with such warmth that the child instantly smiled back, his tiny hands tugging at her scarf. In that moment, Rian saw a softness in her he hadn't seen before, a gentleness that didn't match the world she came from. Arif showed her his drawings, mostly cars, sun, and two stick figures holding hands. Mahira stared at one drawing longer than the others, a man and a child with a bright yellow sun above them. She asked Arif who they were, and he said, "Me and Baba." Her heart tightened at the simplicity of his happiness. When they returned to the mansion later, something unspoken settled between them. Mahira found comfort in Rian's presence, and Rian found purpose in helping someone heal. Days passed, and their unlikely connection grew. Rian visited often, not because she needed a savior, but because she needed a friend who didn't want anything from her. Arif enjoyed the wide gardens and the birds that nested in the tall trees. Slowly, the mansion that once felt like a tomb began to feel like a home again. Mahira learned to smile. Rian learned to hope. And Arif, with his innocent laughter, stitched their worlds together. But life never lets peace stay long without testing it. Mahira's relatives began questioning her decisions, their voices dripping with suspicion. Rumors started spreading that she was being manipulated by a poor mechanic. The board grew restless. Reporters began waiting outside her gates again. One evening, after Arif fell asleep in the garden hammock, Mahira confessed she was terrified they would force her to step down from her own company. She didn't want to lose everything her father built. Rian didn't have solutions, but he stayed. He stayed until her breathing steadied and the stars softened the sky. And then one bright afternoon, almost a month after that 2 a.m. call, Mahira realized something important. She couldn't bear the thought of Rian and Arif disappearing from her life. They had become her heartbeat back to life, guiding her through grief with gentle patience. She couldn't let them go. She couldn't let him